He called her ordinary. He called her forgettable. After their divorce, Damien Hart threw his ex-wife Alara aside like a worn-out shoe, mocking her for being plain simple and knowing her limitations. He flaunted his new life, his new fiancée, and his ambition. But what happens when that ordinary woman, the one he thought was nothing without him, suddenly reappears at the most exclusive gathering of billionaires on Earth? What happens when the man everyone fears defers to her? This is the story of how a single sound, the thud, thud, thud of a private helicopter, can shatter a man's entire reality. The charity gala was exactly the kind of event Damien Hart now considered his natural habitat. It wasn't the Met, not yet, but the Aspen Grove Foundation Ball was a significant stepping stone. The ballroom of the St. Regis was saturated with old money and new ambition, a heady perfume of opportunity. Damien, resplendent in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed truly that he had arrived. On his arm was Sienna, a woman who looked like she'd been genetically engineered to accessorize a life like his. She was 24 with a venture capitalist father and an Instagram following that quantified her value. "Damien, darling," she purred, tapping a manicured finger on his lapel. "Isn't that Charles Taggart over there, the one from Apex Ventures? You simply must talk to him." "All in good time, my love," Damien murmured, scanning the room. He was hunting bigger game. He was here to be seen. His divorce from Alara, finalized 6 months prior, had been an act of liberation. He had, in his own words, shed dead weight. Alara had been ordinary, so shatteringly, infuriatingly ordinary. She was the librarian, quiet, background beige wife he'd married when he was still a nobody. She'd been content with simple things. Second-hand books, long walks, quiet evenings. She had no ambition, no spark. She didn't understand his need to conquer. When he'd finally hit his first major bonus, her first instinct wasn't to celebrate it per se, but to suggest they finally fixed the boiler. He'd left her for Sienna, a decision he considered a corporate merger for his own life. And then he saw her. He froze his champagne flute halfway to his lips. What in the hell is she doing here? Sienna followed his gaze. Who, Alara? My ex-wife. She was standing near a side exit, not mingling, just observing. She wasn't dressed for a gala. She wore a simple dark blue dress that looked like it came off a rack at a department store. Not a bad one, but certainly not couture. She held a simple clutch. Her hair was pulled back. She looked, as always, utterly unremarkable. A wave of irritation mixed with a strange acidic pity rose in Damien. This is embarrassing, he hissed, mostly to himself. She must have snuck in. Or she's working the event. Oh, that's her? Sienna's voice dripped with condescension. She sized Alara up in a single dismissive glance. Oh, darling, she looks tired. She looks desperate, Damien corrected. He straightened his tie, a plan forming. He couldn't have her here. It tainted his new image. He began to stride over Sienna, trailing in his wake a wolf closing in. Alara, he said. His voice was loud enough to make a few nearby heads turn. Alara looked up, her gray eyes betraying no surprise. Just a quiet flatness. Damien, this is a surprise, he said, letting a smirk play on his lips. I didn't think this was your kind of scene. Honestly, how did you even get a ticket? Did you call in a favor with the caterer? Sienna let out a noise like a suppressed giggle. Alara's gaze was steady. I was invited. Invited? Damien laughed. By who? The florist. Look, Alara, whatever this is. He gestured around the opulent room. It isn't you. You were always more simple. It's best if you just go. You're making people uncomfortable. Am I? Alara asked, her voice soft. Or am I just making you uncomfortable, Damien? Don't be ridiculous. Sienna cut in, stepping forward. He's just trying to save you the embarrassment. You're clearly out of your depth. This is an event for doers, for people changing the world. Not for Well, whatever it is you do now. Sorting books. Ilara's eyes drifted to Sienna, then back to Damien. You told me I had no ambition, Damien. That I didn't understand the world you wanted to live in. You said I was a charming but ultimately simple chapter. I believe those were your words. And I was right, Damien said, his patience snapping. He felt the eyes of Charles Taggart on him from across the room and wanted this over. You are simple. You're ordinary. And I am not. Now please leave. You're ruining the ambiance. He took Sienna's arm, preparing to make a grand dismissive turn. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a hiss. This is my world now, Ilara. You were never built for it. Know your limitations. He turned and walked away. He heard a few people at the next table murmur. He felt a swell of pride. He had drawn the line. He'd put the past and its ordinariness firmly in its place. Ilara watched him go. She stood for a moment longer, a ghost in the glittering machine. Then she turned, slipped out the side exit, and disappeared into the aspen night. She walked 2 blocks, her simple heels clicking on the icy pavement until she reached a parked, unassuming sedan. She got in the engine, turning over with a quiet hum. The designer gowns and clinking glasses of the gala faded behind her. She drove for 10 minutes away from the lights, away from the town, toward the darkness of the mountains. She pulled into a small private airfield, one used only by charter flights and the ultra-wealthy. She parked the sedan and walked toward a small heated hangar, the code for the door punched from memory. Inside, her ordinary life ended. Hanging on a rack was a simple black flight suit. On a steel table sat an encrypted satellite phone. She picked it up. There was one text message received an hour ago. It contained only a set of coordinates and 3 words. You're needed. A.V. Ilara stripped off the simple blue dress, letting it fall to the floor. She zipped up the flight suit, her movements economical and precise. She wasn't a librarian. She hadn't been a simple wife. She had been hiding. Her marriage to Damien had been a cover, a deep psychological cover after her last job, a job that had nearly gotten her killed. She'd chosen the most ordinary man she could find in the most ordinary town to disappear into a life of beige. Damien, in his towering arrogance, had been the perfect camouflage. He never looked close enough to see the steel beneath the softness. He only saw what he wanted to see, a mirror for his own greatness. She checked the fuel gauges on the sleek, matte black Pilatus PC-12 turboprop waiting in the hangar. Her real life. She climbed into the cockpit, the familiar glow of the avionics illuminating her face. She was Ilara, yes. But to the only 4 people in the world who mattered, she was known as Cerebra, the ghost, the most sought-after and feared strategic advisor on the planet. She keyed the mic. Aspen Tower, this is November 12 Victor Alpha, ready for takeoff, IFR departure. As the plane climbed into the dark sky, Ilara looked down at the glittering jewel of the St. Regis Hotel. She thought of Damien preening in his tuxedo, mocking her. A small, cold smile touched her lips. He has no idea, she whispered to the darkness. He never did. The Aegis Global Summit was not an event you were invited to. You were summoned. It was held every 2 years, always in a location that was both breathtaking and borderline impossible to access. This year it was the Eyrie, a hyper-futuristic compound built on a private mountain peak in the most remote part of the Canadian Rockies. It was inaccessible by road. The only way in or out was by air. This was not Davos. Davos was for politicians and celebrities. Aegis was for the people who owned the politicians and celebrities. It was a gathering of the 0.001%, the reclusive titans who moved global markets with a single phone call. And this year, the summit was a war room. Alistair Vale, the AV, from the text message, was in trouble. Vale was a legend. A trillion-dollar man who had built Vale Holdings from nothing into a global empire spanning green tech, aerospace, and data analytics. He was also Ilara's first and most important client. He had found her when she was a 22-year-old prodigy at MIT writing a thesis on predictive economic modeling that was so advanced the U.S. Treasury had tried to classify it. He had funded her, protected her, and unleashed her, and in return, she had made him indestructible. Until now. The threat had a name, Cyrus Thorne. Thorne was new money but brutal. He was a corporate raider who didn't just buy companies, he dismembered them. He saw Vail Holdings not as a legacy, but as a carcass to be stripped. He had spent the last year launching a catastrophic high-speed hostile takeover using algorithmic trading, media manipulation, and political sabotage. And according to Alistair's last frantic message, Thorne was winning. Elara's Pilatus cut through the sub-zero air. She wasn't heading to the summit. Not yet. She landed at a private airstrip 100 miles south of the Eyrie. A black armored Mercedes Maybach was waiting on the tarmac, its engine running. Her ordinary life was a distant, comical memory. The blue dress, the gala Damien's smug, punchable face. It was the life of a character she had played. Now she was back in her own skin. She spent the 90-minute drive in the back of the Maybach, which was a mobile command center. Screens flickered, showing her the real-time data flow of Vail's company. She absorbed it all: stock fluctuations, encrypted board communications, derivatives, swaps. Her mind was a high-speed processor, sorting, analyzing, and finding the pattern. "He's not just attacking the stock, Alistair," she said, her voice crisp. The satellite call was secure. "He's attacking your supply chain." Alistair's voice, usually a calm baritone, was frayed. "Elara, he's choking us. He's bought 2 of our key suppliers for microchips. He's bribed the port commissioner in Singapore. My Aquila 7 satellite launched the one that guarantees the next decade of my company. It's grounded. If I can't launch in 72 hours, I forfeit the launch window and the government contract. The stock will collapse. He'll get the company for pennies on the dollar." "Cyrus is a brute, Alistair. He uses a hammer," Elara said, her eyes scanning lines of code. "He thinks you'll panic." "I am panicking, Elara. That's why you're here." "No, you're flustered," she corrected. "Panicking is what he will be doing soon. He's at the Eyrie, correct?" "Yes. Bragging about his victory. He's holding court. He's even poached Damien Hart." Elara's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Who?" "Damien Hart. Your ex-husband. He's a mid-level analyst at BlackRock, but he's been trying to get Thorne's attention for months. Apparently he fed Thorne some low-level intel on one of our subsidiaries. Thorne, as a final insult, hired him last week. He's at the Eyrie as part of Thorne's delegation. A trophy. A way to mock me and... Well, I'm sorry, Elara." Elara was silent. The sheer, predictable stupidity of the man. Damien trying to swim with sharks, not realizing he was the chum. He thought he'd arrived. He was just a pawn, a final petty few from Thorne. "It's irrelevant," Elara said, and she meant it. "Damien is a rounding error, a distraction. Forget him. Focus on the problem. You need a launch. Cyrus is blocking the ports." "It's impossible, Elara. We're trapped." "Nothing," Elara said, her eyes narrowing as she found the flaw in Thorne's plan, "is impossible. You just lack the proper leverage. The Aquila 7 is in its hangar in Mojave, correct?" "Yes, but the guidance system, the chips, they're stuck in Singapore." "Forget the chips from Singapore," Elara said. "They're a lost cause. Thorne has them. Let him keep them. We're going to use the Talon system instead." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Elara, Talon it's not ready. It's experimental. It's not even ours. It belongs to Räikkönen Dynamics," Elara finished. "And Kimi Räikkönen is at the Eyrie right now trying to get funding for his Mars project. He's allergic to people hate summits and is probably hiding in his room. You're going to go to him. You're not going to offer him money. You're going to offer him a 10% stake in Vail Aerospace and full access to your Aquila launch data for his Mars shot. A 10% stake, that's billions. And losing your company is trillions," Elara snapped. He'll get the Talon guidance system on a plane tonight. I'll handle the logistics of getting it to Mojave and integrated. We'll launch in 48 hours. Cyrus Thorne will wake up, read the news, and find out his entire strategy is worthless. He'll be holding a bag of useless microchips he paid a fortune for. Alistair was quiet. The sound of his breathing was the only thing on the line. God, Ilara, This is why you're you. Can you get here to the area? I need you. I need to show them, all of them, that I'm not finished. Ilara looked out the window. The Maybach was pulling into a private fortified compound. This was her base of operations where she would wage the war. I'll be there, she said. But not yet. I have to secure the asset. You go make the deal with Raikkonen. I'll make the calls to Mojave. When I arrive, Alistair, I want it to be public. I want everyone to see me. Understood? Understood, Alistair said, a new strength in his voice. They won't know what hit them. No, Ilara replied, hanging up the call. They won't. The Erie's Grand Terrace was a miracle of engineering. A massive cantilevered slab of white marble and reinforced glass, it jutted out over a 4,000-foot drop. The air was thin cold and crackled with the energy of unimaginable wealth. Damien Hart felt like he could fly. He held a glass of 30-year-old Macallan, the amber liquid glowing in the afternoon sun. He was in. Not just in, but in the inner circle. He'd been at the Eyrie for 2 days, and it had already changed his life. Cyrus Thorne, his new boss, was holding court by the massive ice sculpture centerpiece. Thorne was a physical man, built like a retired linebacker with a voice that boomed across the terrace. He was laughing, clapping men on the back, the picture of a conquering hero, and Damien was his new lieutenant. "Hart, get over here!" Thorne bellowed, waving him over. Damien practically skipped, his chest puffed out. Sienna, who had of course come with him, was preening by the railing, taking a casual selfie with a Saudi prince in the background. "Yes, Mr. Thorne?" "Tell these old fools what you told me." Thorne laughed, slinging a heavy arm over Damien's shoulders. "About Vale's corporate culture, the dead wood, the rot." Damien, high on the attention, launched into the same speech he'd given Thorne in their first interview. "It's a company built on a fossilized legacy, Mr. Thorne. Stagnant, no innovation. Alistair Vale is a dinosaur coasting on reputation. He's surrounded by yes-men. He lost his edge years ago." "See?" Thorne roared to the group of rival CEOs. "The rot is internal. When I take it over, the first thing I'm doing is firing half the board and liquidating the aerospace division. It's a vanity project, a money pit." A few of the men nodded, eager to agree with the new apex predator. Damien felt a thrill. He was shaping the conversation. Damien Hart was providing the intellectual justification for the biggest takeover of the decade. And, Damien added, feeling bold, his weakness has been personal. He's isolated. No family, no real connections. He's a man alone on a collapsing throne. "Well said, Hart. Well said." Thorne drained his glass. "A man alone. I like that." From across the terrace, Alistair Vale watched this display. He sat alone at a small table nursing a coffee. He looked exactly as Damien had described him, a dinosaur, isolated, defeated. The other summit attendees gave him a wide berth, as if his failure was contagious. Vale's phone buzzed. A text from Ilara. Raikkonen agreed. "Talon is airborne. ETA Mojave, 0400. Integration team is standing by. Now I'm handling the second problem." Vale looked up. He caught Thorne's eye. Thorne raised his glass in a mock toast, a cruel, triumphant grin on his face. Vale didn't smile. He simply stood up and walked back inside, a defeated man. Thorne's laughter boomed. He's running back to his room to cry." Damien laughed with him, the loudest of all. He had never felt so powerful. He hated Alara for making him feel small for so long, for her quiet judgment, her lack of belief in him. And now he was here and she were filing books in some dusty, forgotten library. He spotted Sienna. This, he whispered to her, pulling her close, is what winning feels like. This is the big league. Oh, Damien, she breathed. You're amazing. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the laughter and the high-altitude wind. It wasn't the polite whine of the Bell 407s that had been ferrying most of the guests up the mountain. This was a deep, guttural, percussive thud. 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 It was a sound that didn't just break the sound barrier. It bullied it. It was the sound of raw, unadulterated power. The conversations on the terrace faltered. Heads turned, scanning the bright blue sky. "What the hell is that?" Thorne asked, his good humor evaporating. The sound was an intrusion, an unwelcome one. "It's a chopper," someone said, stating the obvious. "I know it's a chopper, you idiot," Thorne snapped. "But what chopper? That's not one of the summits." It crested the peak, a monster against the sun. It was a Sikorsky S-92. Not a civilian spec one. This was matte black with modified lines. It looked less like a corporate transport and more like something that belonged to a Delta Force team. It was the kind of machine that didn't ask for landing clearance. It took it. Damien shielded his eyes, annoyed. Who the hell is arriving now? The summit's been on for 2 days. It's tacky to arrive this late. The Sikorsky didn't aim for the main helipad. It bypassed it, heading for Alistair Vale's private reinforced landing pad, the one attached to his Erie Prime penthouse. The wind from the rotor wash was immense. It blasted the terrace, sending napkins flying and rattling the champagne flutes. "Arrogant," Thorne muttered, brushing his suit. The helicopter settled onto the pad, its engines winding down with a high-pitched scream. Every person on the terrace, the Titans, the Kings, the Predators, was silent, watching. An arrival like this was a statement. Damien squinted, trying to see who was important enough to command such an entrance. It's probably some government official, trying to look important. The side door of the Sikorsky slid open. The first to emerge were not passengers. They were operators. 2 men dressed in unassuming but clearly high-end tactical gear. Charcoal gray Arcteryx shells, no visible weapons, but the air of lethal competence was unmistakable. They stepped onto the pad and scanned the area, their movements fluid and economical. They were not summit security. They were private. Cyrus Thorne went very still. "What is this?" Damien, still oblivious, just scoffed. "Such a production. It's probably just a PR stunt." The 2 operators took positions on either side of the door. Then Alistair Vale, the man who had looked so defeated just moments before, walked out of his penthouse onto the landing pad. He wasn't wearing his funereal suit. He was in a crisp shirt, no tie, and he looked different. Calm. He walked to the helicopter and stood by the door. He wasn't greeting a guest. He was waiting for one. This new detail silenced the terrace completely. Alistair Vale, the trillionaire, was waiting on someone else. Alistair extended his hand into the dark interior of the cabin. A moment later, a hand took his, and she stepped out. The sun hit her, and Damien's world stopped. It was Alara. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. This woman was not ordinary. She was not beige. She was not the simple librarian he'd mocked. This woman was a razor. She wore no makeup, but her skin was flawless. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She wore a deep gray, perfectly tailored Armani pantsuit that was the color of a storm cloud. She wore flat, practical, but clearly expensive leather shoes. Her only accessory was a watch, a simple steel Patek Philippe, and a pair of dark, impenetrable sunglasses. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the stunning view. She stepped off the helicopter, released Alistair's hand, and spoke to him. She was too far to hear, but her body language was all business. He nodded deferentially. Alistair Vale, nodded to her. Alara turned to one of her security details, gave a crisp order, and then turned back to Vale. She gestured toward the penthouse. Business. Now. Damien. Sienna's voice was a thin, reedy sound. Damien, who is that? Damien couldn't speak. His throat had closed. The Macallan glass in his hand was so slick with his own sweat that it slipped from his fingers, falling to the marble with a dull, pathetic clack. It didn't break. It just rolled, spilling 30-year-old scotch at his feet. His entire brain was a blue screen of death. Error. Does not compute. Alara. Simple. Ordinary. Librarian. Helicopter. Sikorsky. Vale. Error. That's... A man next to him whispered, a rival CEO. My God, is that Cerebra? Who? Someone else asked. Cerebra, the ghost. I've only heard rumors. She's not a person, she's a concept. They say she structured the EU Project Dawn bailout. They say she's the only person the new Chinese premier will take a call from. I thought she was a myth, a boogeyman for the boardrooms. Cyrus Thorne was no longer smiling. His face had gone a chalky pale white. He knew the name. Everyone at this level knew the name. They thought she was a myth, a legend created by Vale to intimidate his rivals. They were wrong. Alara and Vale turned to walk inside. And for a split second, Alara paused. She turned her head, sunglasses still on, and scanned the terrace. It was not a look. It was a target acquisition sweep. Her head swiveled past Damien. Her eyes, hidden behind the Purcell lenses, didn't stop. They didn't slow. They didn't register his existence. He was nothing. A tree, a rock, a piece of furniture. He was to her just a part of the background. In that single dismissive half-second, Damien Hart experienced a humiliation so profound, so complete, that it hollowed him out. His public mocking of her at the Aspen Gala, his Know Your Limitations speech, his condescending pity, his new life, his new fiancé, his new master of the universe status. It all collapsed into a black hole of his own insignificance. She was not the one who was ordinary. He was. Alara turned away and, with Alistair Vale following a half-step behind her, stepped off the helipad and disappeared into the penthouse. The terrace was silent. The only sound was the high-altitude wind, which suddenly felt very, very cold. All the power, all the money, all the ambition. It had just shifted. It had tilted on its axis, and it was all now pointing to the woman who had just arrived. Sienna was staring at Damien, but not with love. With dawning horror and contempt. You, she whispered, her voice laced with venom. You idiot. You told me she was nobody. Damien opened his mouth. No sound came out. He had mocked her as ordinary, and she had just stepped off a billionaire's helicopter in total deafening silence and erased his entire world. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, silent and insulated from the world. The living room was not a living room. It was a command center. Hollow screens, data streams, and encrypted comms arrays lined the walls. Alara didn't pause. She stripped off her suit jacket, tossing it on a chair. Report. Alistair and his two top aides, who had been waiting in a state of near panic, snapped to attention. Alara, Alistair began. This is Marcos and Chen. They have the latest. Talon is integrated, Marcos, the aerospace chief, said immediately. We're green for launch, but Alistair, there's a problem. Thorne wasn't just blocking the ports. Go on, Alara said, her eyes already scanning a data stream. He has someone on the launch commission, Chen, the legal counsel, said, his voice trembling slightly. He's just filed an emergency injunction, a safety review, citing untested guidance systems. He's using our own safety protocols against us. It'll ground the Aquila for at least a week. The launch window will be gone. Alistair sagged. He's 3 steps ahead. He knew we'd try something. Alara held up a hand. He's not 3 steps ahead. He's 1 step ahead. And he's sloppy. He used a hammer. Again. She walked to the main comms panel. "Who is the commissioner he bought?" "Jared Lynch," Chen said, "head of the Western Range Oversight Committee." Alara's fingers flew across a keyboard. She wasn't hacking. She was just accessing. Jared Lynch. Married. 2 kids. A $1.2 million mortgage on a $400,000 salary. A boat in the marina. A daughter at USC. "He's dirty. We know that," Alistair said, frustrated. "But we can't prove it in time." "We don't need to prove it," Alara said. She stopped typing. A file was on her screen. "Lynch's daughter, her tuition. It's not paid by Lynch. It's paid by a blind trust, the Argosy Fund, established 3 months ago." "Thorne's slush fund," Alistair breathed. "Exactly. Chen, you're a lawyer. You're going to call Lynch, right now. You are going to tell him that you are filing a sealed RICO complaint with the Southern District of New York, naming him and the Argosy Fund as co-conspirators in a stock manipulation scheme. You are going to tell him that you have full auditable proof that the fund paid his daughter's tuition. And you are going to tell him that the only way his daughter doesn't get expelled and he doesn't end up in a federal prison is if his safety review finds no issues in the next 30 minutes. Chen was pale. That's extortion. Alara turned to him, her gray eyes devoid of heat. "This is checkmate. Do it." Chen galvanized, grabbed a secure phone, and ran to the next room. "Marcos," Alara said, turning to the aerospace chief. "Thorne's injunction isn't his only play. He'll have a backup. He'll try to sabotage the launch pad. I want our internal Falcon drone security active. All of it. Set the exclusion zone to 5 miles. I want anything that moves man or animal flagged and tracked. Authorized non-lethal deterrence. Go." Marcos ran to his own station. Alara and Alistair were alone. "You're terrifying Alara," he said, not unkindly. "I'm efficient," she corrected. "Cyrus Thorne thinks this is a game of money. He thinks he can buy his way to a victory. He doesn't understand. This is a game of information. He's loud. He's arrogant. He leaves a trail." She thought for a fleeting second of Damien. Men like that, they are their own worst enemies. Their ego is a liability. You just have to know where to push. "And Damien Hart?" Alistair asked, watching her. "He's part of Thorne's team. He's here." Alara looked at him. "Damien is a symptom. He's a barnacle attached to the whale. He thinks he's moving the ocean, but he's just along for the ride. He's not a player, Alistair. He's a pawn. And pawns," she said, her voice dropping, "are made to be sacrificed." A low-level buzz came from the main console, a proximity alert. "What is it?" Alistair asked. Alara's eyes narrowed. "Someone is on the terrace right outside the penthouse. They've bypassed the main security." "Thorne?" "No, not his style. This is sloppy." She hit a button. The soundproof glass became a one-way mirror showing her the view outside, but they remained invisible. It was Damien. He looked broken. His suit was rumpled. His hair was a mess. He was standing at the glass staring at his own pathetic reflection, not knowing she was on the other side watching him. Sienna was gone. He raised a fist and in a pathetic gesture of rage hammered on the glass. It didn't make a sound inside. "Alara!" He screamed, his voice a muffled, distant cry against the triple-paned, impact-proof glass. "Alara, I know you're in there. You bitch. You made me look like a fool." He sank to his knees. "How could you? How? What are you? You were my wife. You were ordinary. You were mine." Alistair looked at Alara, his face full of pity and disgust. "Do you want me to have him removed?" Alara watched her ex-husband, the man who had mocked her for his own sport, sobbing on his knees. She felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction. It was like watching a documentary about a particularly uninteresting species of insect. "No," she said, her voice flat. He's irrelevant. He'll be gone when he gets cold. She turned away from the window back to the data streams. Chen's call should be done. Let's launch a satellite. The news broke at 5:00 a.m. just as the sun was beginning to touch the peaks. It didn't come from a press release. It came as a physical fact. A low, ground-shaking rumble that vibrated through the eyrie, waking every CEO and financier from their sleep. On the massive screens in the summit's central hall, the live feed from SpaceX, who handled the broadcast, switched on. Live Vail, Aerospace, Aquila 7. Successful launch. Mojave Air and Spaceport. The video was undeniable. The massive rocket blazing a trail of fire ascending flawlessly into the dawn sky. The hall was silent. Cyrus Thorne, who had been in a frantic all-night meeting, saw the screen and his blood ran cold. "No," he whispered. "No. Lynch. The injunction." His phone rang. It was his head of legal. "He's dark," the lawyer screamed. "Jared Lynch has gone dark. His phone is off. His house is empty. His family is gone." "What about the launch pad?" Thorne roared. "My team. I sent a team." "Detained," the lawyer said. "Picked up by private security. Trespassing on a federal exclusion zone. Alara. Cerebra. She boxed us in. She knew every move." Thorne threw his phone against the wall. It shattered. The Aquila 7 was in orbit. The government contract was secure. Vail's stock on the pre-market wasn't just recovering, it was exploding. It had jumped 40%. Thorne's hostile takeover hadn't just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. He was now shorting a rocket ship. The margin calls would begin in 1 hour. He wasn't just going to lose money, he was going to be wiped out. He looked across the hall. Alistair Vail was standing there in a fresh suit, drinking a coffee, calmly watching the rocket's telemetry data. He was alone. Alara was nowhere to be seen. Her work was done. But Thorne's humiliation wasn't complete. "Mr. Thorne," he turned. It was Damien Hart running toward him, his face a mask of desperate, frantic energy. "Mr. Thorne, sir, I have information." Damien panted. "Get out of my way, Hart." Thorne started to push past him. "No, wait, it's Alara, my ex-wife. I know her weaknesses." This of all things made Thorne stop. He turned a look of pure toxic curiosity on his face. "Weaknesses? Yes, she's sentimental." Damien lied, grasping at straws. She has a soft spot for art, for antiquities. She's not just a numbers person. And how?" Thorne said, his voice dangerously soft. "Would you know that Hart? The man who thought she was a librarian?" Damien's face fell. You," Thorne said, stepping so close Damien could smell the rage and scotch on his breath, "are the reason for this. You were the final insult. You were the signal. You were the pawn. No, I'm your lieutenant." "You're fired," Thorne spat. "You're a fool. You're an embarrassment. You didn't just sleep next to the most powerful woman in the world, you divorced her because she was too ordinary for you." Thorne laughed. It was a terrible, broken sound. "You're the punchline, Hart. The entire summit is laughing at you." He shoved Damien so hard that he stumbled backward, falling over a lounge chair. Thorne stormed out of the hall, his empire collapsing around him. Damien sat on the floor in his rumpled $1,000,000 suit as the titans of industry walked past him. No one offered a hand. No one even looked at him. Sienna was already gone. He'd seen her at 3:00 a.m. in the lobby getting into the elevator with the Saudi prince. He was ruined. Not financially. Not yet. But in a way that was so much worse. He was a joke. He had flown to the sun. He had bragged and postured and mocked. And the wife he'd thrown away, the ordinary wife, had been the sun all along. And she had burned him to ashes without even noticing he was there. His phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. His joint account with Sienna had just been emptied. He just sat there as the world moved on without him, the image of the Aquila 7 burning on the screen above. The private airfield 100 miles south of the Eyrie was a study in desolation. It was not a place for arrivals. It was a place for disappearances. A single wind-swept tarmac cut a black line through a sea of white. Snow had begun to fall, not in gentle-looking flakes, but in hard, stinging pellets, driven by a wind that moaned across the empty landscape. The cold was absolute. It was a cold that felt personal, a living thing that sought to find and freeze the marrow in one's bones. Elara's Pilatus PC-12 sat waiting, a sleek gray shape against the churning gray sky. Its engines were in a low-level idle, the propellers turning in a slow hypnotic arc, ready to bite the air. She had been on the ground for exactly 20 minutes. In that time, she had debriefed with her ground team, confirmed the Aquila 7's telemetry was stable, and was already running diagnostics on her next project, a deep data analysis of water rights negotiations in the Zambezi River Basin. The Eyrie Alistair Vale. Cyrus Thorne, that file was already closed in her mind, marked success and archived. She wore a long, dark wool coat over her suit. Her duffel bag containing a change of clothes, a secure laptop, and 3 encrypted hard drives was slung over her shoulder. She was walking toward the plane, her boots crunching on the thin layer of ice when the sound came. It was not the wind, and it was not the engines. It was a shout. Elara. It was a raw animal sound ripped from a throat. A sound of pure unadulterated panic. She paused her back to the noise. She did not sigh. She did not flinch. She simply stopped calculating. The sound was not a threat. It was an annoyance. A loose thread she thought had already been snipped. She heard him running, the frantic, uneven thud-slap-thud of a man in expensive, thin-soled dress shoes slipping and sliding on the icy tarmac. "Elara, please wait." Slowly she turned. He looked like a survivor of some terrible wreck. He was coatless. His Tom Ford tuxedo, the one he had worn with such peacock-like pride, was now a ruined, rumpled mess, stained with what looked like motor oil from whatever desperate charter helicopter he had taken. He must have burned the last of his credit or promised some astronomical fee to get here. His hair was matted with sweat and melting snow. His face was a mask of raw, red-chapped skin, his eyes wide and bloodshot, tracks of dried tears visible on his cheeks. He stumbled, caught himself, and finally skidded to a stop 10 feet from her, breathing in great, ragged, sobbing gasps that turned to steam in the frozen air. "Elara," he panted, holding a hand up as if to stop her from vanishing. I'm sorry." She said nothing. She just watched him. Her face was impassive, shielded from the wind by the collar of her coat. She was a statue of judgment, and he was the penitent, breaking himself against her. I didn't know." He pleaded, the words tumbling out. You have to believe me. How could I possibly know you? You lied to me. For years." He was starting to get angry, the pity shifting to blame as it always did with him. You were a librarian. You, who are you?" "That," Elara said, her voice quiet, but it cut through the wind like a razor, "is the only question you've ever asked me that actually matters. And you've had a decade to find the answer." "But our life," he cried, his voice cracking. Our marriage? Was it all a joke to you? All those years? The house, the dinners, us? Were you laughing at me?" Elara allowed a small, cold, clinical thought to surface. She analyzed him. The self-pity, the victimhood, the utter inability to comprehend a universe that did not revolve around him. "Laugh at you, Damien," she said, taking one step closer. The wind whipped a strand of her hair from its knot, and she ignored it. "No, I was never laughing. Laughter implies amusement. You were a condition. You were camouflage. I was a fugitive in a sense, hiding from a life that had nearly killed me. And you were the most ordinary, incurious, self-absorbed man I could find. You were the perfect hiding place. Incurious, he repeated, shaking his head, uncomprehending. I asked about your day every day. You asked, she corrected, but you never listened. You asked, how was your day, as a prelude to telling me about your day. You were so busy building your own narrative, trying to impress a world you thought was watching, that you never once looked at the person living in your own house. You saw a quiet, simple woman because that's what you needed to see. You needed a beige background to make your own colors look brighter. You didn't want me to be anything more. She let that hang in the air. He was shaking, but not just from the cold. So what? He stammered. I was just a cover. A pawn? He had used the same word Thorne had. She saw the bitter irony. You weren't a pawn in my game, Damien, she said. You weren't in my game at all. You were on a different board entirely. One you built for yourself. I was simply biding my time. Waiting. You call our life a lie. I call it a cocoon. I was waiting to be finished with it. You just mistook the cocoon for the butterfly. But... He was desperate now, the reality of his own insignificance crashing down on him. I can change, Alara. I see you now. I get it. I can be useful to you. He took a step forward, his hands out. I'm good with people I'm good at strategy. You need a public face. Someone to manage things. I can do that. I can be whatever you want. I can be your anything. Just don't leave me like this. Please. Of all the things he had said, that was the most revealing, the most pathetic. Ilara's gaze, if possible, grew colder. What you're feeling right now, Damien, isn't love. It isn't even regret for what you lost. It's envy. You're grieving the status you think I could give you. You just swapped one trophy Sienna for a new one you think is more powerful. You haven't changed. You've just recalculated. You're still the same man, just with a new price tag. No, he screamed, the wind tearing the word from his mouth. No, you're wrong. I'm ruined. Don't you understand? You did this to me. You and Vale. You made me a joke. She took her final step, stopping directly in front of him. He was taller, but in that moment he had never looked so small. I did nothing, she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. I simply arrived. I existed. Your own ego, your own arrogance, your own need to put me down to build yourself up. That is what ruined you. You stood at that gala and you mocked me. You told me to know my limitations because you couldn't bear the thought that I might not have any. You built your house on a foundation of sand, Damien, she continued, and you are blaming the tide for coming in. You are not a joke because of me. You are a joke because you are one. He had no answer. He just stared, his mouth open, as the truth of her words, the final, brutal clinical assessment, hit him. She held his gaze for 1 second longer. Then she turned her back to him and walked the remaining steps to her plane. Ilara, no, no, he yelled, a sound of pure childlike despair. Don't go. You can't just leave me here. She didn't pause. She mounted the steps, her movements fluid and unhurried. She reached the top, gave a single nod to the pilot visible in the cockpit, and stepped inside. The heavy door began to hiss closed. Damien, in a last desperate surge, ran forward, his hands outstretched. Ilara! The door sealed with a solid final thunk. It was the sound of absolute finality, the sound of a vault locking. Damien hammered on the metal, his gloveless fists striking the cold fuselage. No, let me in! Ilara, come back! He might as well have been punching a mountain. The engines, which had been at a low idle, suddenly whined the pitch, screaming higher. The propellers became a blur, then a transparent-looking disk. A blast of prop wash, a hurricane of ice pellets and snow erupted from the engines, hitting Damien with the force of a physical blow. He was thrown backward, stumbling, shielding his face as the icy shrapnel cut at his exposed skin. He fell, landing hard on his back on the frozen tarmac. Through the stinging blizzard he watched, prone and pathetic, as the Pilatus taxi turned its nose to the runway and without a moment's hesitation raced into the wind. It lifted off with a power and grace that seemed impossible, climbing at a steep, aggressive angle, disappearing into the heavy gray clouds in seconds. And then, silence. The engine's roar faded, replaced instantly by the high, thin, lonely moan of the wind. Damien Hart lay on the tarmac, the snow beginning to fall on him again, settling on his ruined suit and his unseeing eyes. He was left alone in the cold, with nothing but the crushing, absolute, and inescapable weight of his own ordinariness. In the end, this was never a story about revenge. Revenge would have required Alara to care. This was a story about consequence. Damien Hart built his entire world on the idea of image, on looking down on others to feel tall. He thought the ultimate flex was his new fiancée, his new boss, and his new life. But he forgot the most important rule: the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. He mocked her as ordinary, without ever realizing that he was the only one who couldn't see the truth. She didn't need to defeat him. She just needed to be herself. And in the end, her silence was louder and more devastating than any of his boasts. What did you think of Alara's story? Let me know in the comments what you think Damien will do next. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a story of quiet power, and subscribe for more stories where the ordinary turn out to be anything but.
A hush falls over the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, where New York's richest parade beneath chandeliers that sparkle like 1,000 cameras. Tonight is the Heart of the City Gala, the year's ultimate event, a place where legacies are built, secrets are traded, and the powerful gather to be seen. No one suspects that before midnight, this glamorous world will shatter in front of their eyes. At the center of it all stands Jonathan Colton, a self-made billionaire, master of the deal, a man who clawed his way from nothing to the top of Manhattan's skyline. Every gesture is calculated, every smile practiced for the press. By his side tonight is Cassandra Monroe, a woman as infamous as she is beautiful. Her dress, a blood-red designer gown, clings to her every curve, turning heads and igniting whispered rumors. Jonathan barely tries to hide her. Why would he? His wife, Scarlett, is nowhere to be seen. Or so he thinks. Cassandra clings to Jonathan's arm as he makes the rounds, greeting old-money bankers, politicians, celebrity athletes. Flutes of Dom Perignon are raised, but most eyes are on the couple. The room is buzzing. Everyone knows Jonathan is married. Everyone also knows this is not the first time he's been reckless with the truth. But tonight, his audacity is unmatched. He doesn't care who sees. He wants Scarlett to know. He wants everyone to know. The band falls silent as the mayor gives a brief speech about charity and the values that make this city great. Jonathan barely listens. He's too busy basking in his own legend, nodding to friends and enemies alike. He glances at his phone, waiting for an update about a business merger worth billions. Across the room, Cassandra laughs too loudly at a joke she barely understands, already tipsy on champagne and victory. Then, it happens. The ballroom doors swing open with a crash that echoes off marble floors. Every head snaps toward the entrance. A ripple of confusion sweeps the crowd. This is not part of the evening's program. The doors hang wide, and for a long moment, no one moves. Standing in the doorway, framed by the golden light of the hallway, is Scarlett Colton. She is 6 months pregnant, her midnight blue dress hugging her round belly, her dark hair swept back to reveal eyes that burn with quiet fury. But she's not alone. At her side stands Ethan Blackwell, the reclusive billionaire CEO whose presence alone can shift the market. Tonight, his arm is protectively wrapped around Scarlett's. The statement is unmistakable. The room freezes, then erupts in whispers and nervous laughter. Even Jonathan is momentarily stunned, his confidence faltering. Cassandra's nails dig into his arm. She hisses under her breath, "What is she doing here?" For once, Jonathan has no answer. Scarlett surveys the crowd, her posture regal, her face a mask of serenity hiding a storm beneath. She ignores the glares, the pitying looks, the sudden flash of cell phone cameras. She doesn't care about the judgment. She cares about truth, about finally exposing the rot at the center of this beautiful world. A hush returns as Scarlett steps forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. Jonathan tries to intercept her, but Ethan's presence makes him hesitate. For years, Jonathan has thrived on intimidation and manipulation. Tonight, he feels a twinge of fear. Scarlett stops before the main table, every guest watching. She addresses Jonathan, but her voice is loud enough for all to hear. "Jonathan, I thought I'd find you here, with her." Her gaze flickers to Cassandra, who bristles, lips curled in a sneer. "I just wanted to thank you, Jonathan, for showing me who you truly are. For reminding me that no matter how much you build, the truth will always find its way to the surface." The crowd gasps. A few people try to stifle laughs, others glance nervously at the press. The air is electric, every word etched into memory. Jonathan stammers, struggling to regain control. "Scarlett, let's not do this here. This isn't the time." But Scarlett doesn't flinch. "No, Jonathan, you made your choices public. So let's be honest with everyone." Her hand goes to her belly, steady and protective. "I'm not here to beg. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because you can't erase me, or our child, no matter how hard you try." Cassandra tries to insert herself, her voice sharp with contempt. "This isn't your world anymore, Scarlett. You should just leave." Scarlett looks her up and down, unfazed. "I built this world, Cassandra. I was here before you, and I'll be here long after you're gone." Ethan's quiet strength beside her is enough to silence the remaining doubters. He says nothing, but his hand on Scarlett's shoulder tells the entire room whose side he's on. Suddenly, a flash from a paparazzi camera cuts through the tension. The press senses blood in the water. Social media lights up as guests scramble to tweet and text what's unfolding. Jonathan's empire, his reputation, his myth of control, crumble with every click. Scarlett's voice softens, but carries even further. "You thought you could humiliate me, Jonathan, but the real shame is yours. And tonight, the whole world will see it." She turns, calm and unhurried, and lets Ethan escort her from the ballroom. The crowd parts before her like the Red Sea, no longer whispering but openly staring in awe. Tonight, Scarlett Colton isn't the abandoned wife, the victim, the footnote in Jonathan's story. She's the beginning of a new legend. And as she disappears into the hallway, the guests realize they've just witnessed history, the moment power shifted forever. Scarlett Colton always knew how to blend in. It was her secret power, the ability to slip through parties, meetings, and even marriage without ever making a scene. In a city built on spectacle, she made her way by being forgettable. The nice girl with the shy smile, the woman you thanked for arranging the charity auction but never quite remembered. That invisibility, once her shield, was now her most lethal weapon. Years before her life turned into a headline, Scarlett had a story that no one at the gala ever bothered to learn. She wasn't born into privilege or trained for the ballroom. Instead, Scarlett Rose Evans grew up in a small New Jersey apartment, the only child of a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse and a father she never knew. Her world was filled with secondhand books, thrift store clothes, and long nights spent studying by the light of a flickering desk lamp while her mom slept on the couch. Scarlett learned to be quiet, to stay out of the way, to survive. It was never her dream to marry a billionaire. In fact, Scarlett had her own dreams. She put herself through college with scholarships and odd jobs, majoring in nonprofit law because she believed she could make a difference. She was passionate, driven, and above all, independent. Her work at the Women's Legal Aid Office was challenging and sometimes thankless, but she loved the feeling of making someone's life a little easier, even if no one ever said thank you. When Scarlett met Jonathan Colton, she was 26, fresh out of law school and completely unprepared for the world he represented. He swept into her life like a hurricane, charming, ambitious, larger than life. Their first date was at a cheap Italian place near her office, but he treated it like the opening of the Met. He listened, or seemed to, laughing at her dry humor, marveling at her stubbornness. By the end of the night, Scarlett felt seen in a way she never had before. Jonathan was relentless. Flowers at her office, invitations to glittering events, whispered promises of a future filled with love and adventure. He painted their life together as a fairy tale, one where she was his anchor, the only person who truly understood him, the one woman immune to his billions. Scarlett, exhausted by years of struggle, let herself believe. She let herself fall. Their wedding was a whirlwind. The society pages called it the union of heart and empire. But Scarlett only remembered the nerves in her stomach, the pressure to fit into a world that spoke a language she barely understood. She traded her small walk-up for a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Central Park. Jonathan wanted her to quit her job. "You don't have to work anymore," he said. "Let me take care of you." She resisted at first, but eventually she caved. He promised her purpose, and she wanted to believe him. But in the months that followed, Scarlett's world began to shrink. The life Jonathan promised was gilded, but lonely. Dinners with investors, brunches with wives who only cared about the Hamptons and handbags, endless events where she was expected to smile but never speak her mind. Jonathan insisted on privacy. No social media, no interviews, no hint of trouble. The more she tried to fit in, the more invisible she became. She tried to fill her days with meaning, volunteering at shelters, joining nonprofit boards, helping at charity auctions. But even here, Jonathan cast a long shadow. "Don't embarrass me," he'd warn if she asked a tough question at a board meeting or disagreed with a donor. He hated conflict, especially if it reflected on him. Scarlett became an expert at swallowing her opinions. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife. She wore designer dresses Jonathan chose, posed for photos when asked, and hosted parties with flawless grace. But inside, she felt the slow suffocation of someone losing herself. The friends she made before Jonathan faded away, replaced by a rotating cast of socialites and gatekeepers. When she tried to confide in her mother, the advice was always the same: keep your head down, be grateful, he's a good provider. For a while, Scarlett convinced herself this was enough. She focused on the good days, Jonathan's rare flashes of genuine affection, the nights they shared stories from their childhoods, the little moments when he let his guard down and just held her. She wanted to believe those moments meant something. But as Jonathan's empire grew, the distance between them widened. His business came first, always. He traveled constantly, took meetings at all hours, and stopped coming home for dinner. When Scarlett became pregnant, she hoped things would change. She imagined Jonathan softening, finding joy in their new chapter, maybe even turning to her for support. For a while, it seemed to work. Jonathan was attentive, excited to share the news with his parents, promising to be there for every milestone. Scarlett let herself hope, but the old patterns returned. Jonathan's phone calls grew shorter, his patience thinner. He snapped at Scarlett for small things: buying the wrong baby blanket, not smiling enough at a gala, asking too many questions about his business deals. He started staying out later, blaming work dinners that ended with the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Scarlett tried to rationalize, to excuse, to forgive. But deep down, she knew. Still, she stayed quiet. She kept the peace. She told herself she was protecting their child, that maybe things would change once the baby arrived. She buried her disappointment and wore her best smile for the world. But every day, her heart hardened a little more. The girl who once dreamed of changing the world was now fighting just to keep herself afloat. Scarlett's greatest strength was never her beauty or her grace. It was her resilience, the ability to watch, to learn, to wait for the right moment. All those years of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, she was ready to turn that invisibility into a weapon. She started quietly gathering information, watching how Jonathan moved, remembering every slight, every betrayal. She called in old favors, rekindled friendships she'd let lapse, built a network beneath the surface. Scarlett understood now. You don't have to be loud to change everything. You just have to know when to speak and when to strike. The world saw a quiet, pregnant wife, but inside, a storm was building. The annual Heart of the City Gala was meant to be a display of charity, wealth, and good intentions. But tonight, the marble halls of the St. Regis Hotel felt more like a battlefield. Each guest a potential witness, each glittering light exposing more than just sequined gowns and polished shoes. Outside, black cars lined the street, paparazzi snapped photos, and a crowd pressed against velvet ropes, hoping to catch a glimpse of New York royalty. Inside, The ballroom was a fever dream of luxury. Massive floral centerpieces, rare peonies, roses, and lilies filled the air with a heavy sweetness. Waiters glided silently, balancing trays of caviar, foie gras, and champagne so expensive you could buy a car for the cost of a bottle. The orchestra played classics, but beneath the music was an undercurrent of nerves and anticipation. For the city's elite, these nights were more than a party. They were a performance, a competition to see who could dazzle and dominate. Jonathan Colton was the unofficial king of this world. He thrived on these nights, working the room like a candidate shaking hands on election day. He never lost his focus. As CEO of Colton Enterprises, he moved with unshakable confidence, $100 million behind every smile. His name carried weight. His word could make or break deals, and everyone wanted just a sliver of his attention. Cassandra Monroe, ever at his side, fed off the energy. She sparkled with calculated charm, laughing at the right moments, brushing past rivals with practiced indifference. She was his newest trophy, a reminder that Jonathan got what he wanted. Tonight, she wore a scarlet dress designed for maximum attention, every inch a deliberate contrast to Scarlett Colton's signature understated style. The crowd played their roles, feigning ignorance while devouring every detail. Rumors about Jonathan and Cassandra had floated for months, but tonight he made them real. Posing for photographers, introducing Cassandra to board members, acting as if his wife had simply ceased to exist. Even among the jaded socialites and cynical journalists, the display bordered on cruelty. But Jonathan reveled in it. He believed himself untouchable. Behind the scenes, staff exchanged nervous glances. Scarlett was supposed to be at home, resting on doctor's orders. Everyone assumed she'd retreated, humiliated and alone. After all, who would willingly walk into a room where her marriage was being torn apart in public? But Scarlett was no ordinary woman. Unbeknownst to the guests, Scarlett and Ethan Blackwell waited in a private suite, watching the ballroom through a discreetly cracked door. Ethan's presence was a silent statement, one of wealth, influence, and more importantly, protection. He'd been a family friend for years, a quiet ally who'd seen Jonathan's transformation from hungry entrepreneur to ruthless mogul. He saw what Scarlett endured, even when no one else cared to look. Scarlett's phone vibrated with texts, friends warning her to stay away, PR advisors begging her to control the narrative, her mother worried about stress. Scarlett ignored them all. Tonight, she needed to be seen. She needed the world to witness the truth for itself. The evening's program was meticulously planned. Cocktail hour, dinner, then speeches and a charity auction. Jonathan, in his element, toasted to family and tradition, the hypocrisy lost on no one who actually knew him. He basked in applause, already thinking about his next business move, already looking past the damage he'd done. Cassandra stayed glued to his arm, scanning the room for cameras, soaking up envy. She took pleasure in the stares, the backhanded compliments, the hush of whispered disapproval. As far as she was concerned, she'd won. Scarlett was finished. But as the orchestra paused and the mayor took the stage, the mood began to shift. People checked their phones, murmured, and glanced toward the door. Even Jonathan noticed, his brow furrowing at the sudden change in atmosphere. Then, the doors opened. The world froze. Scarlett entered, head high, every inch a queen refusing exile. The shock rippled outward, a few gasps, a flurry of whispers, then silence so profound you could hear the flicker of candles on the tables. She looked radiant, but also deeply changed. There was nothing weak or defeated in her eyes. Ethan Blackwell followed, stoic and powerful. For the first time in years, Jonathan Colton looked unsure. Cassandra's grip tightened, her mask of confidence slipping. Scarlett moved forward, every step measured. She didn't search for approval or support. She only had eyes for Jonathan. The mayor tried to regain control. "We welcome all families tonight." But the crowd's attention belonged to the drama unfolding on the marble floor. The press moved in, phones up, ready to stream every word, every tremor of the impending storm. The event was no longer about charity. It was about power, betrayal, and reckoning. Scarlett stood directly in front of Jonathan, her presence undeniable. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "for showing me what matters." Her hand went to her belly, "and for reminding me that strength isn't about how loud you are, but how much you can endure." Cassandra couldn't hold back. "This is pathetic, Scarlett. You don't belong here." Her words cut through the room, but instead of wounding, they exposed her insecurity. Scarlett's calm was terrifying. "On the contrary," she replied, "this is exactly where I belong." Jonathan tried to save face, voice low and trembling with anger. "You're making a scene." Scarlett's reply, "No, Jonathan, you did that the moment you decided your ego was worth more than our family." Flashbulbs popped. Investors, friends, enemies, everyone watched, riveted. In a single moment, the illusion was shattered. Jonathan was not untouchable. Scarlett was not a victim. As Scarlett turned to leave, escorted by Ethan, the crowd erupted, not in applause, but in whispers of respect, of disbelief, of awe. Tonight, the gala was no longer about charity. It was about the birth of a new legend, forged in fire and humiliation. And as Scarlett walked out, her strength and dignity lit the way for every silent woman who had ever been told to know her place. If Scarlett was the invisible queen, then Cassandra Monroe was the master of spectacle, the queen of calculated chaos. Cassandra didn't come from money. In fact, she grew up knowing hunger as well as ambition, learning from a young age that nothing in life was given. Everything had to be taken. Her mother, a failed actress, raised Cassandra on a steady diet of reality television and whispered bitterness about the men who'd left her behind. By 16, Cassandra had mapped her escape: beauty, wit, and a willingness to play dirty in a world that rewarded ruthlessness. Cassandra's weapon was always her charm. She could disarm a room with a smile, make a stranger confess secrets, or convince a billionaire he'd come up with her ideas himself. She was brilliant at reading people, at spotting weaknesses, and she never hesitated to use what she found. While others called her opportunistic or cold, Cassandra considered herself a survivor. Her arrival in Manhattan was no accident. At 21, she took a bus from Miami to New York, armed with 3 outfits, a list of exclusive parties, and a fake resume polished to perfection. She started as a hostess at a midtown nightclub, quickly working her way into the VIP section and, from there, into the circles of men who could change her life. She dated up the ladder, never staying long, always looking for the next rung. Jonathan Colton wasn't just a target, he was the jackpot. Cassandra spotted him at a charity poker tournament, alone at the bar while Scarlett mingled with donors. She saw his restlessness, his hunger for admiration. Most women would have been intimidated. Cassandra was thrilled. Here was a man used to getting whatever he wanted, a man ripe for manipulation. Her first move was subtle. She accidentally spilled a drink near him, apologized with wide, innocent eyes, then feigned embarrassment. Jonathan, flattered by the attention, played the rescuer. By the end of the night, Cassandra had his private number and the promise of a business meeting. The rest was a masterclass in seduction. For Jonathan, Cassandra represented everything Scarlett was not. Reckless, outspoken, dangerous. She made him feel powerful, even as she subtly pulled his strings. She encouraged his complaints about Scarlett, egged on his worst impulses for a septh, and whispered doubts about his wife's loyalty. When Jonathan questioned her intentions, she played hurt. When he grew arrogant, she flattered him. Their affair quickly became the worst-kept secret in their circle, but Cassandra didn't care. She wanted more than Jonathan's attention. She wanted his name, his money, and his legacy. Scarlett, of course, knew the type. She'd seen women like Cassandra her whole life, using sex and secrets to carve out power in a world that denied them both. But what made Cassandra truly dangerous was her intelligence. She wasn't just playing Jonathan. She was infiltrating his business, making friends with key board members, leaking gossip to the press, and positioning herself as the woman behind the man. She played victim and villain in equal measure, whichever role got her closer to the prize. The press adored her. Tabloids called her the city's most notorious other woman, speculating about engagement rings and prenups before Jonathan had even asked for a divorce. She fed them stories, always careful to cast herself as misunderstood, a woman just looking for love in the wrong places. Her Instagram grew by hundreds of thousands of followers, each post carefully curated. Luxury vacations, cryptic captions, diamond bracelets, gifted by a friend. Jonathan's name was never mentioned, but everyone knew. Inside Jonathan's penthouse, Cassandra was even more cunning. She went through his files when he was away, collecting information. She learned the names of his investors, his passwords, the times he met with lawyers. She paid attention to which employees seemed loyal and which grumbled behind closed doors. She kept tabs on Scarlett too, who she called, where she went, what charities she supported. Every bit of information was ammunition for the war Cassandra planned to win. She ridiculed Scarlett's style, calling her outdated and frumpy to Jonathan's face, fueling his doubts. She made sure to dress in ways that made Scarlett's classic taste seem plain. At social events, Cassandra would accidentally bump into Scarlett, offering backhanded compliments or snide remarks meant only for her ears. She wanted Scarlett to feel small, to doubt herself, to give up. What Cassandra never understood was that her cruelty wasn't breaking Scarlett, it was forging her. Each insult, each humiliation, each whispered lie only made Scarlett stronger, more resolved. Cassandra was building a fire she couldn't control. Still, for a while, it seemed like Cassandra was winning. Jonathan became colder, more distant, treating Scarlett like an inconvenience rather than a partner. The board began to question Scarlett's presence at meetings. Friends took sides, most choosing to avoid the drama by avoiding Scarlett altogether. Even the house felt hostile, every room echoing with the sense of betrayal. Cassandra sensed victory. She pressed Jonathan to speed up the divorce, to finally make it official. She told him his image would improve, that the world would respect him for being decisive, for choosing love over duty. She whispered about building a new family, starting fresh, leaving the past behind. Jonathan, hungry for approval, listened. But in her arrogance, Cassandra underestimated the depth of Scarlett's intelligence and the strength of her resolve. While Cassandra schemed, Scarlett watched. While Cassandra whispered, Scarlett listened. And while Cassandra celebrated too soon, Scarlett was preparing for war. By the time the gala arrived, Cassandra felt certain of her victory. She flaunted her relationship, paraded through the ballroom, and waited for Scarlett's inevitable defeat. What she didn't see, what she could never understand, was that the real power had never belonged to her. It had always belonged to the woman she tried to erase. For a long time, Scarlett believed humiliation was something you could escape if you simply stayed silent, played your part, and kept your head down. But nothing prepares you for the sting of betrayal played out on a public stage. That night, at the heart of the city gala, Jonathan and Cassandra made sure the world would see Scarlett's heartbreak, and they savored every moment. It started with the cruelest detail. Scarlett's name left off the guest list. She was meant to stay home, out of sight and out of mind. She was to watch the event, her event, the one she'd helped organize for years, streamed online, smiling for the cameras, while Jonathan and Cassandra became the main attraction. But fate had other plans. The whispers began early, spreading like wildfire. "Did you hear? Jonathan's bringing Cassandra tonight." "Where's Scarlett?" Maybe she finally left. Eyes flickered to the entrance with every arrival, hoping for scandal, and they were not disappointed. Jonathan appeared with Cassandra on his arm, a vision of audacious confidence, as if daring the world to challenge him. They posed for photos. Cassandra pressed close, Jonathan's hand at the small of her back, a touch once reserved for Scarlett, now a declaration of replacement. The room buzzed with tension, even as laughter and polite conversation tried to cover the discomfort. Investors nudged each other, board members exchanged glances, and journalists took mental notes for tomorrow's headlines. Scarlett watched from the hallway at first, her hands trembling, heart pounding in her chest. She felt both sick and furious. How had it come to this? But there was no running away. Not tonight. Not anymore. With Ethan Blackwell by her side, Scarlett entered the ballroom. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Cassandra's triumphant smile faltered for the briefest second before hardening into something sharper. Jonathan's jaw clenched. It was all happening in slow motion, every detail burned into Scarlett's memory. Scarlett felt the eyes of the world on her as she crossed the floor. She felt exposed, but also oddly powerful. She could almost hear her own heartbeat as she stopped, just feet from the stage where Jonathan and Cassandra were holding court. The program shifted to the charity auction, the auctioneer's voice rising above the tension. Jonathan, in a final petty move, made the highest bid of the night, donating a sum that would guarantee a write-up in the papers. The crowd applauded, but it sounded hollow. Then Cassandra, seizing her moment, stepped to the microphone. I'd like to thank Jonathan Colton, not just for his generosity, but for showing what true partnership looks like. The jab was unmistakable. Eyes darted to Scarlett, searching for a reaction. Scarlett steadied herself. She could have left, could have let them finish their performance. But instead, she walked directly to the center of the room, her voice calm and clear. I'd like to thank the donors tonight, especially those who remember what this event is really about. For some of us, partnership means loyalty. For some of us, family still matters. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Cassandra, caught off guard, tried to laugh it off. Some people just can't let go, can they? She sneered. Her friends giggled, eager for the drama. Jonathan, his composure slipping, stepped forward. Scarlett, please, don't do this here. Scarlett locked eyes with him, refusing to back down. No, Jonathan, you did this. You brought her here, made your choice, and tried to erase me. Her hand went to her belly. But you can't erase the truth. Not here, not tonight, not ever. The crowd gasped. Some were uncomfortable, others captivated. A few began recording on their phones, knowing this would be viral by morning. Cassandra took Jonathan's arm, attempting to pull him away, but he stood rooted, pale with embarrassment. For the first time he looked uncertain, unsure of what to do when his usual power plays failed him. Scarlett continued, her voice unwavering. You didn't just betray me, Jonathan. You betrayed every vow you ever made. You tried to humiliate me, but you only revealed who you really are. Her gaze swept the room, landing on the board members, the investors, the society wives who'd once called her a friend. I will not be shamed. I will not be erased. A hush fell again, deeper and more electric than before. The mayor tried to deflect with a joke, but no one laughed. The night's glamour was gone, replaced by raw, undeniable truth. Scarlett turned to leave, her dignity intact, but Cassandra couldn't resist one last shot. You're pathetic, Scarlett. You're nothing without him. Scarlett didn't break stride. That's where you're wrong. I was someone before him. I'll be someone long after. What about you, Cassandra? Ethan Blackwell stepped in, offering Scarlett his arm. Together they exited the ballroom, leaving Jonathan and Cassandra standing awkwardly in the spotlight's harsh glare. As the doors closed behind Scarlett, the energy in the room shifted. The whispers started anew, this time with a different kind of awe. The betrayal had been public, brutal, unforgettable. Scarlett's pain was now their spectacle, but it was also the start of her transformation. For the first time, Jonathan and Cassandra realized they hadn't just humiliated Scarlett, they'd set her free. The city would wake up to a different kind of story. Scarlett Colton was no longer a victim. She was about to become the reckoning. Outside the shimmering lights and echoing laughter of the heart of the city gala, Scarlett Colton found herself standing in the cold night air, her breath fogging in the winter darkness. The marble steps beneath her felt like ice through her heels. For a moment, the city's endless noise faded, replaced by the drumming of her own heart and the trembling in her hands. Scarlett had always imagined heartbreak would be dramatic, a scene with screaming, broken glass, maybe rain pounding against a window. Instead, it was numbness. She was suspended in a silent void, the world muffled around her. Her chest ached with a pain so sharp it stole her breath. She hugged her coat tighter around her swollen belly, feeling her baby shift as if offering silent comfort. Ethan Blackwell stood beside her, concern etched in every line of his face. "Scarlett, let me drive you home," he said quietly, but she shook her head. She couldn't go home. Home wasn't a refuge anymore. It was the scene of the crime, filled with Jonathan's cologne, Cassandra's lipstick stains, and the ghosts of promises that meant nothing now. For a few minutes, Scarlett just stood there, staring at the city that once seemed to hold infinite promise. The humiliation replayed in her mind, each word Cassandra spat echoing louder, each of Jonathan's dismissive looks cutting deeper. For years, Scarlett had endured in silence, believing things would get better if she just loved harder, gave more, stayed smaller. Now she realized nothing could have stopped the storm. She'd just been too afraid to see it coming. Ethan gently guided her to his car. The ride was silent except for the faint jazz on the radio. Scarlett's phone buzzed with messages, her mother begging her to come home, former friends offering hollow sympathy, and unthinkably, Jonathan texting, "We need to talk." She let the screen go dark. The time for talking was over. When Ethan dropped her off at her apartment building, he offered to come up, but Scarlett declined. "Thank you, Ethan. I need to be alone tonight," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Inside, the apartment felt cavernous. Every shadow seemed longer, every memory sharper. The photos on the walls, her and Jonathan in better days, vacations, celebrations, looked like strangers. She let her purse fall to the floor and collapsed onto the living room rug, unable to hold the tears back anymore. The sobs came in waves, raw, primal, unfiltered pain. Scarlett cried for the girl she used to be, the marriage she tried so hard to save, the baby she'd dreamed would bring them closer. She cried for the humiliation she suffered at the gala, for the friends who disappeared when things got hard, for every cruel word that had chipped away at her spirit. She was angry at Jonathan, furious at Cassandra, but most of all, she was angry at herself, for believing love could fix a man determined to destroy himself, for thinking silence would be rewarded with loyalty, for losing pieces of herself in a world that never valued her truth. As the night deepened, Scarlett drifted into exhausted sleep on the floor, her hand curled protectively around her stomach. In her dreams, she heard her mother's voice, soft, gentle, reminding her that storms always pass and that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from destruction. She woke to weak sunlight streaming through the curtains, her face puffy and her head throbbing. For a moment, Scarlett wanted to stay in the darkness, to pretend the night before hadn't happened. But her baby kicked, sharp and insistent, anchoring her back to reality. Scarlett dragged herself to the shower, letting the hot water scald away the shame and doubt. As she washed away her tears, something inside her shifted. The pain was still there, but underneath it, a flicker of anger. And something else, too. Resolve. After getting dressed in the simplest clothes she owned, Scarlett sat at her kitchen table, staring at her reflection in the glass of cold coffee. She made a list. She needed to call her lawyer, to freeze the joint accounts, to take back control of her life. For so long, she'd let Jonathan dictate the terms. Now she would set her own. But the hardest call was to her mother. Scarlett hesitated, her fingers trembling as she dialed. "Mom?" she said, her voice breaking. Her mother didn't hesitate. "Come home, sweetheart, just for a little while. Let us take care of you." Scarlett didn't want to be seen as a victim, didn't want to admit defeat. But in that moment, she knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed to heal, to grieve, to find herself again, before she could ever hope to fight back. Packing a small bag, Scarlett moved through the apartment slowly, almost reverently. She paused at her wedding photo, her fingers brushing the glass. For a long moment she considered smashing it, letting the broken pieces reflect how she felt inside. But instead, she set it face down on the mantel, a silent declaration that this chapter was over. As she locked the door behind her, Scarlett wasn't sure what the future would hold. She was still heartbroken, still lost, still angry. But somewhere in the depths of her pain, she felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her darkest night was the start of something new. She stepped into the morning, determined to survive, determined to rebuild. For the first time in a long while, she realized she was free. Not from pain, but from the prison of someone else's expectations. And as the city roared around her, Scarlett Colton made herself a promise. This would not be the end of her story. The city barely noticed Scarlett Colton's absence after the gala. In New York, gossip moves fast, but attention moves faster. People moved on to fresher scandals, assuming she would quietly disappear. Even Jonathan believed it. He convinced himself Scarlett was broken, hiding in shame, too weak to fight back. But that's exactly what she wanted him, and the world to think. Scarlett's retreat was not a surrender. It was a calculated withdrawal, the quiet before a storm. In her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a simpler past, Scarlett plotted. Her mother fussed over her, making tea, pressing comfort into every word. Her father checked locks twice at night. But Scarlett's mind never rested. She started by calling her lawyer, a woman she trusted, someone she had met long before Jonathan. "I need you to open the envelope," Scarlett said, her voice steely. It had sat in a safety deposit box for years, unopened by anyone but her. Inside were documents, a trust fund established by her late grandmother, legal titles, old stock certificates, and a letter with a simple sentence: "If you ever need to stand on your own, you have everything you need." You are stronger than you know. For years, Scarlett hid this part of herself. She didn't want to be the rich girl or to give Jonathan any power over her. Her marriage had been built on the lie that she needed Jonathan's money, his name, his protection. But her family's legacy was older and deeper than his. Tied up in silent investments, charitable foundations, and a controlling stake in a holding company, Jonathan's lawyers had never bothered to research. Scarlett had always intended to give her fortune to causes she believed in: domestic violence shelters, legal aid funds, scholarships for girls who reminded her of herself. She'd hoped to change the world quietly, from the background. But now she realized sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop hiding your strength. The next call was to a forensic accountant. Scarlett needed to know everything Jonathan had tried to hide, from offshore accounts to insider trades, any dirt that could be used as leverage. The accountant, an old friend of her father's, listened in silence and said only, "I'll find what you need. Just be ready for what I bring you." Scarlett reconnected with friends she'd let drift away: journalists, nonprofit leaders, women she'd once represented as a lawyer. She apologized for her absence, then quietly asked for help. She didn't need them to take sides. She only needed them to tell the truth if the time came. Meanwhile, Jonathan was oblivious. He celebrated his victory, parading Cassandra to every event, making a show of moving on. He started the divorce proceedings, expecting Scarlett to sign whatever was put in front of her. Cassandra pushed him to demand everything: property, accounts, even Scarlett's jewelry. "Make her pay," Cassandra urged, "so everyone knows you're in control." Jonathan liked the idea. Power was his addiction. The first shock came when Scarlett's lawyer responded to the divorce petition with a counteroffer. Scarlett Colton reserves her right to all premarital assets, family inheritances, and controlling interests held in trust prior to marriage. She also requests a formal audit of Colton Enterprises and its subsidiaries, citing potential malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty. The language was legal, but the message was clear. Scarlett wasn't going quietly. Jonathan scoffed. He told his lawyer to push back, certain Scarlett was bluffing. But the next day, his banker called in a panic. "There's been a freeze on several accounts. Some of your shares are in dispute. What's going on?" For the first time, Jonathan realized he didn't have as much control as he thought. Cassandra was livid. How is this possible? She was nothing. But the truth was clear. Scarlett had always had the power to destroy everything Jonathan built. She simply never wanted to. Until now. Scarlett didn't need to play dirty. She let the facts speak. Her lawyer delivered documents showing her independent wealth, her board seats, her voting rights. She quietly informed Colton Enterprises that she would be attending the next shareholder meeting, and that she would be bringing questions about recent expenditures, missing funds, and conflicts of interest. In private, she reached out to Ethan Blackwell. "I need your advice," she said. Ethan listened as Scarlett laid out her plan. "You could run Colton Enterprises yourself," Ethan said. "You have the skill, the assets, and more respect than Jonathan ever did. Why not take what's yours?" Scarlett hesitated, but the idea took root. Meanwhile, Jonathan's world started to unravel. The board was suddenly nervous. Investors demanded answers. The press caught wind of the internal battle, speculating about the return of the real Mrs. Colton. For the first time, public opinion shifted in Scarlett's favor. She wasn't the abandoned wife anymore. She was the wronged heiress, the woman taking on a cheating billionaire and his gold-digging mistress. Scarlett moved with quiet precision. She didn't gloat or attack. Instead, she presented herself as steady, reasonable, and, above all, strong. She made one public statement: "I have always believed in family, in honesty, and in using one's privilege for good. I will not allow my name or my child's to be tarnished by greed or betrayal." For years, Jonathan had relied on Scarlett's silence. He never dreamed she would fight back, much less outplay him at his own game. But as the days passed and the evidence piled up, even Cassandra began to see the truth. Scarlett was not just a wife. She was an empire. And for the first time since her world fell apart, Scarlett felt powerful. Not because of her inheritance, but because she was done hiding. The secret was out, and she was ready to rewrite the rules. The city that once overlooked Scarlett Colton was now watching her every move. In the days following her legal counterstrike, news outlets ran stories about the mysterious heiress taking on her cheating billionaire husband. Commentators who once dismissed her as just a wife were now calling her brilliant, relentless, and, above all, dangerous. The old narrative had been shattered. Scarlett was no longer a shadow. She was a force. But for Scarlett, transformation wasn't just about headlines or money. It was about reclaiming her sense of self. She started with the small things, the daily rituals she had once abandoned in the name of being a perfect wife. Each morning, she made her own breakfast, brewed her own coffee, and wrote in a journal, not for anyone else but for herself. She took long walks, letting the city's noise fuel her determination. For the first time in years, she wore what she wanted. Sharp blazers, tailored pants, bold colors that announced her presence. Her physical transformation followed. She booked an appointment at a top Manhattan salon. Not the one Jonathan's assistant used, but the one she loved before she was ever a Colton. The stylists welcomed her back, eager to help her shed the last traces of her old life. Her hair, once worn soft and safe, was cut into a sleek, modern style. She opted for a wardrobe makeover that was both classic and commanding, clothes that said, "I am in control." The first time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. For a moment, she even smiled, but it wasn't just about appearance. Scarlett's mindset was changing too. She started reading again, picking up books about business, leadership, and women who had rewritten their destinies. She attended networking events, not as Jonathan's wife, but as Scarlett Evans, attorney and philanthropist. She reconnected with old colleagues, joined women's leadership forums, and quietly let the city know she was back and better than ever. She also invested in her health, hiring a prenatal fitness coach and nutritionist, determined to enter motherhood from a place of strength rather than survival. Every step was intentional, every decision fueled by the knowledge that she was building not just a comeback, but a legacy for her child. The city was abuzz with stories of her transformation, but Scarlett barely noticed. She was too busy becoming the woman she'd always wanted to be. Meanwhile, her professional strategy was flawless. Scarlett requested meetings with key board members at Colton Enterprises. She arrived early, greeted everyone by name, and laid out her vision for transparency, ethics, and innovation. Many board members, long tired of Jonathan's bullying and excess, were surprised and deeply impressed. One told her privately, "You have the presence of a real leader, Mrs. Colton. The company needs you now more than ever." Scarlett didn't just stop at business. She launched a new charitable initiative in her own name, supporting women in crisis and young mothers rebuilding their lives. She made a high-profile donation to the very shelter where she once volunteered, giving interviews about the importance of female empowerment and financial independence. No woman should ever have to choose between dignity and survival, she told a national morning show. Her words went viral, inspiring thousands who saw their own struggles reflected in her courage. The media ate it up. Glossy magazines called her the comeback queen, while financial reporters praised her as a visionary with more integrity than half the men on Wall Street. Social media exploded with hashtags, Shash, Scarlett Strong, Rewrite the Legacy. For the first time, Scarlett felt the full weight of her influence. The woman Jonathan and Cassandra tried to erase was now setting the standard. Jonathan, meanwhile, was losing ground fast. His reputation was in tatters. Board members questioned his leadership. Investors threatened to pull out. Cassandra tried to do damage control, but she was no match for Scarlett's intellect or the tidal wave of public support now backing her. Jonathan's calls to Scarlett went unanswered. His lawyers received only cold, professional replies from her team. Scarlett's transformation culminated at the next Colton Enterprises board meeting. She arrived in a striking white suit, her head held high, her belly a visible symbol of her future and strength. Cameras flashed as she entered, not as a guest, but as a major shareholder with voting power. Jonathan tried to minimize her, cracking jokes and raising his voice. But Scarlett didn't flinch. When the meeting began, Scarlett calmly laid out the financial misconduct, the ethical breaches, and her plan to restore the company's reputation. She called for a vote of no confidence in Jonathan's leadership. The room fell silent. One by one, hands rose, enough to strip Jonathan of his position. Cassandra, realizing her power was gone, stormed out. The press documented every moment. By the end of the day, headlines blared, "Pregnant wife ousts billionaire husband in boardroom coup." Scarlett declined interviews, preferring her actions to speak for themselves. She left the building surrounded by supporters, her transformation complete. That night, alone in her new apartment, Scarlett let herself finally breathe. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And the world, once determined to keep her silent, was now hanging on her every word. Scarlett knew the fight wasn't over, but she'd already won the most important battle. She had taken back her story, her power, and her future. And this was just the beginning. The aftermath of Scarlett's boardroom victory spread across the city like wildfire. Every news channel ran clips of her striding into Colton Enterprises in that white suit, her belly unmistakable, her posture unyielding. Newspapers devoted front-page headlines to her triumph. For weeks, the question on everyone's lips was the same. How did the quiet wife topple a billionaire, and what would she do next? But for Scarlett, the real reckoning had only begun. Jonathan Colton's world collapsed almost overnight. Major investors, wary of scandal and eager for a new era, withdrew their support. The company's board, once packed with Jonathan's yes-men, welcomed Scarlett as interim chairwoman. Employees who'd once feared speaking up now lined up to share their stories of mismanagement, intimidation, and even corruption under Jonathan's rule. The company's stock, volatile after months of rumors, began to stabilize as Scarlett's vision and discipline took hold. Meanwhile, Cassandra Monroe's fall from grace was as rapid as her ascent. The tabloids, always hungry for a villain, now pounced on her as the manipulative other woman. Exclusive interviews dried up, socialites stopped returning her calls, invitations to the city's most exclusive events vanished. Even her Instagram following, a source of her self-worth, plummeted as the public soured on her narrative. For years, Cassandra had defined herself by her ability to outmaneuver other women. Now, she was yesterday's news. Scarlett, however, didn't waste time gloating. Her revenge was never about making Jonathan or Cassandra suffer. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her agency, and her future. Still, the world demanded a show, and Scarlett was ready to deliver. Her first move was bold. She called a special shareholders' gala, inviting press from around the globe. The invitation itself was a masterstroke, printed on thick white cardstock with gold lettering. The tagline was clear: a new chapter, honoring integrity, innovation, and inclusion. Jonathan and Cassandra were both invited. The city buzzed with anticipation, speculation running wild about what Scarlett would do. The night of the gala, the ballroom pulsed with electricity. Industry leaders, philanthropists, and journalists crammed inside. Jonathan arrived, trying to appear unbothered, but his forced smile fooled no one. Cassandra entered quietly, avoiding cameras, desperate to blend into a world that no longer belonged to her. Scarlett arrived last, making an entrance that silenced the entire room. She wore a deep emerald gown, the color of power and rebirth, with her hair swept back and her shoulders squared. Flanked by key board members and respected leaders, Scarlett commanded the room not with drama, but with effortless authority. Gone was the woman who once stood in Jonathan's shadow. In her place was a queen. The program began with speeches from the board, praising Scarlett's leadership and vision. Employees shared stories of the company's new culture of transparency and respect. Then, as the crowd held its breath, Scarlett stepped up to the podium. She spoke of lessons learned, the dangers of unchecked ego, the cost of silence, the power of resilience. She never mentioned Jonathan or Cassandra by name, but everyone in the room understood who she meant. "It is not enough to inherit a legacy," she said, her voice ringing clear. "We must build a future worth inheriting. Tonight is not just about my story. It is about every woman who has been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to accept less. To those women I say, take your place. The world needs your voice." The crowd erupted in applause, some even standing in ovation. Reporters scrambled to send updates. Jonathan, red-faced and fidgeting, tried to slip away quietly, but more than one guest blocked his path. Men and women eager to distance themselves from his toxic brand. Cassandra, barely holding back tears, left early. For the first time in her life, she realized just how empty victory could feel when it's built on someone else's pain. Scarlett, meanwhile, stayed long after the program ended. meeting with young professionals, mentors, and single mothers she'd invited as guests of honor. She made sure the night was not just a win for her, but for every person who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. The next morning, the internet exploded with clips of her speech. Hashtags like #Scarlet Reckoning and #New Legacy trended globally. Young women posted videos telling their own stories, inspired by Scarlett's strength. Business magazines hailed her as a new kind of leader, one who led with heart as well as strategy. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came a week later, when Jonathan tried to rally his remaining allies and found none left. Even former rivals called Scarlett to offer support or ask for her insight. She received invitations to serve on major philanthropic boards and was approached about writing a memoir. Her lawyer, smiling, delivered news that the final divorce settlement was finished. Scarlett would retain full control of her own assets, major holdings in Colton Enterprises, and her dignity, something no one could ever take again. Scarlett's revenge was never about public humiliation or private destruction. It was about building something lasting, something her child could be proud of. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but as she looked at the world she'd remade in her image, she realized, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's proving they were never your equals to begin with. And as Scarlett Colton watched the city lights flicker from her new office, hand resting on her growing belly, she felt a peace deeper than any triumph. Her legacy, reclaimed and rebuilt, would outlast every betrayal. Scarlett Colton's life no longer revolved around whispers, shadows, or waiting for someone else's approval. She had become something more than even she imagined, a symbol of strength, resilience, and transformation. As summer dawned over New York, a new era was quietly taking shape, one built not on revenge, but on the kind of legacy that could never be erased. The days after the shareholders' gala were a whirlwind. Every magazine wanted an interview. Networks requested exclusive specials. Book agents sent proposals. Her face appeared on billboards, magazine covers, even podcasts dedicated to women's leadership and overcoming betrayal. But Scarlett remained measured. She accepted only one in-depth interview, sitting with a respected female journalist in the sunlit office of her new foundation. "How did you find the courage to fight back?" the journalist asked, voice gentle but curious. Scarlett thought for a moment. "For a long time, I believed strength meant silence, that if I endured quietly, things would get better. But the truth is, you cannot build a life on shrinking yourself for someone else. I realized the world only changes when we refuse to accept less than we deserve." The segment aired nationwide. Letters poured in. Stories from women who'd walked away from toxic marriages, single mothers building new lives, young girls now dreaming of boardrooms and corner offices. Scarlett read every message, some with tears, some with laughter. She realized she had become more than a headline. She was a beacon for anyone who'd ever been betrayed or overlooked. As her due date approached, Scarlett poured herself into her work. The Colton Foundation for Women and Families launched with a vision to support those starting over. Scholarships for girls from struggling backgrounds, legal aid for women facing abuse, seed money for women-owned startups. Scarlett visited shelters, schools, and community centers, speaking not as a billionaire's wife but as a survivor and advocate. One summer afternoon, at a ribbon cutting for a new housing program, a teenage girl nervously approached her. "Miss Colton," she stammered, "I saw your story. People always told me I'd never make it, that I'd always be stuck, but you changed my mind." Scarlett knelt, eye to eye. "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you," she said softly. "Your story is just beginning. Don't let fear write the ending." It was moments like these that meant more than headlines ever could. Jonathan, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. His face occasionally appeared in the business press, always as a cautionary tale, a man undone by his own arrogance and blindness. Cassandra moved to the West Coast, seeking a fresh start, but never recapturing the power or spotlight she once stole. Scarlett never spoke publicly about either of them again. She no longer needed to. Her actions had written the final chapter. As the seasons turned, Scarlett welcomed her child, a daughter, healthy and strong. Holding her newborn in the soft light of her apartment, Scarlett felt the full circle of her journey. all the nights she'd cried on that living room floor, all the times she thought she'd lost everything, all the pain that had threatened to drown her. It was transformed now. This tiny, perfect life was proof that from devastation, something beautiful and unbreakable could grow. Motherhood brought new perspective. Scarlett balanced late-night feedings and board meetings, lullabies and legislative advocacy. She was honest about the struggle, never pretending to have it all, but always striving for balance and meaning. She made time for herself too. Walks in the park, quiet dinners with friends, moments spent laughing and dancing with her daughter. As her foundation flourished, Scarlett expanded her reach. She lobbied for changes in family law, supported female candidates for office, and launched mentorship programs for young women in business and law. Her influence rippled outward, changing not only the city, but the lives of countless families. Her signature style, sharp suits, bold colors, a streak of silver in her hair, became iconic. Women around the world posted photos online, Scarlett inspired, celebrating their own moments of triumph and defiance. Scarlett never claimed to be perfect. She was honest about her fears, her setbacks, her failures, but she never allowed them to define her. One autumn evening, Scarlett hosted a gala for her foundation. The room was filled with women she'd helped, entrepreneurs, students, mothers, survivors. As she stood at the podium, her daughter clinging to her hand, Scarlett paused, overcome by emotion. "When I lost everything I thought mattered," she said, voice thick with gratitude, "I discovered what truly endures. Not money or titles, but courage, compassion, and the willingness to rewrite your story, no matter how many times it's been erased." The applause was thunderous, but it was the quiet smiles, the grateful hugs, the whispered thank yous afterward that lingered. That night, alone by her window, Scarlett reflected on all she had survived. She knew there would always be more battles, prejudice, heartbreak, moments of doubt. But she also knew her worth was not defined by anyone else's choices. It belonged to her, and to the child she now loved beyond measure. Her story became legend, not because she took down a billionaire, but because she rose again and again after being knocked down. Because she taught her daughter, and every woman watching, that weakness and kindness are not the same. That there is no shame in starting over, no defeat in walking away, no limit to the power within a woman determined to change her fate. Scarlett Colton's final lesson was simple, but unbreakable. You do not need to be loud to be strong. Your scars are proof that you survived, and no one, not a man, not a legacy, not the world, can erase the truth of who you are unless you let them. For every person watching, her story was more than drama. It was a call to stand tall, to speak out, and to trust in their own resilience. Scarlett Colton was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable, and her legacy of hope, power, and new beginnings would live forever. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here until now? If you're still watching at this point, I believe something in Scarlett's journey must have touched your heart in some way. And honestly, maybe it's because deep down we all know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be hurt, or to wonder if we're strong enough to start over. The message of this story isn't just about revenge or dramatic twists. It's about finding your voice when others try to silence you, and realizing that true strength is built not by never falling, but by rising every time you do. As the old heterodox saying goes, the wound is where the light enters you. Every heartbreak, every setback can become the very place where your real power is born. So, if you're out there wondering if you have what it takes to rewrite your own story, trust me, you do. You are more than anyone's betrayal, more than your lowest moment. If Scarlett can reclaim her legacy, so can you. If you felt moved or inspired, please like, comment below with your thoughts or your own story, share this video to lift someone else up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind you your life is worth fighting for.